What's up, guys? It's a Saturday. It's the start of NFL playoffs. Huge college basketball card. I am not doing well. I'm 0-6 across the last 3 days on this show. I actually wound up jumping on the Iowa money line last night, though, so I got one win out of that just because I couldn't help myself. I mean, it's just too much of a letdown spot for Nebraska. I didn't want to lay the points, but I found like minus 190, and I'm like, I'm just going to do it. Sometimes it's all about timing, and I don't know. You got to watch like the market and gather more info. So sometimes like doing this show like at the same time every day, it's kind of like, I don't know. Certain things can change. Although I besides that, I've actually given out all my actual plays on the show. So I don't know, I'm going to try to continue with that. I got a bunch today. The name of the game today is Letdown Spots. We're going to break this losing streak, although I did myself with Iowa last night, but we're going to do it. There's no way. I don't want to jinx myself, but I don't think I'm going to go 0-8 or whatever I have today. I think I have 8 plays today. So one of them's in the NFL. I have my NFL video up, but that is on the Chiefs at minus 3.5, and they are up to 4.5 still, I believe. It looks like maybe 5. They have 68% of the cash and 61% of the tickets. I think even though the weather, I think, is being overstated, I think it is certainly a factor that is kind of hard to gauge how significant it actually is. It's going to be one of the coldest NFL games on record, and that certainly is an advantage to Kansas City against Miami. Miami has terrible numbers in weather that's cold, but not even as cold as this, whereas Kansas City is much more of a cold weather team. Kansas City has other advantages as well. I think even though Miami kind of stumbled into the playoffs, Miami's coming off that hard-fought game against Buffalo in the last game of the week, the late game of the week, whereas Kansas City got to like rest some of their starters. I think they might have the edge there as well because of the rest, even though I don't know if that's going to make their starters on offense be a little bit cold. But you also have Kansas City's weakness is kind of their offense, and that's going up against Miami's weakness, which is their massively injured defense. So everything seems to line up pretty nicely for the Chiefs there, but the number has kind of gotten away a little bit. It's at 5. I would try to play like a different, find a different way to play this. Maybe the Chiefs total to go over, the Chiefs points scored, or maybe, I don't know if there's like a money line approach to that or something like that. Because I don't know if I'd want to lay 4.5 or 5, but I think the Chiefs do have significant advantages here. That and Miami just has not done well in these step-up games, and it looks to me like their sideline is lost, which of course could all change in one game, but I don't like the looks of that sideline the last few weeks, so that's where I'm at there. And then the Browns-Texans game, the earlier game, the market is still indicating on the Texans now with 53% of the tickets on the Browns, 51% of the cash on the Texans, although it's moved back up a little bit on the Browns, back to like 2.5. I think I still lean to Cleveland just because they have the experience and the better defense, and that's kind of just what you got to go with in the playoffs, even if they did win the other game against Houston easily. That was without CJ Stroud, so people are going to look at that and maybe even maybe weigh that less than maybe they should, because that still was the Browns offense was still able to do stuff against the Texans defense. Now, the Texans defense has some injuries as well and is not really that good. The Texans defense is going to be the worst unit on the field in that game. The Browns pretty balanced, have an okay offense and a really good defense, whereas the Texans don't have a good defense and they have a really good offense. So moving to college basketball, there's just such a massive slate. I can't really talk about every single one of these games. This was really tough to narrow it down. Name of the game is just going to be letdown spots, man. I'm going back to my bread and butter, and I'm just doing it. So, there are a few other spots that I think are also letdown spots that I'm not quite on, but I'll mention, I guess, I think VCU was in a letdown spot. They just had a nice win over George Mason. I don't like the spot for them, but they're up from 5-6 against LaSalle. So not really the greatest spot for VCU, and they got they got St. Louis up next. They don't really have much up next, but that was a nice win over George Mason that they had there. Now it's their second straight road game, having to go face LaSalle. LaSalle does have a pretty decent overall record, though, but LaSalle's coming off a blowout loss to UMass and coming back home, so that's kind of the way I lean there. I don't even know what the KenPom numbers are on these, but I usually point them out. And Ken Palm was definitely off on that Iowa game. I did look at some other sets of power ratings that are different from his, even though his are the best. And other ones had Iowa much rated much better against versus Nebraska than Ken Palm does. Although I don't want to really buck Ken Palm very much, but Ken Palm has this one at 4 for VCU, so it is lower than what the number is. Drake, I believe, is in a letdown spot. They just had the huge win, like the battle basically for conference supremacy in the Missouri Valley. Drake beat Indiana State. That's a huge win. They're up from a pick 'em to a 2 on the road against Southern Illinois. I don't like Drake in that one. I mean, like I said, I think they're just in a letdown spot. I'm not on these games, but Ken Baum has this one at Southern Illinois actually winning this game by 2. So I might consider looking that way. The win over Indiana State's pretty big, but Southern Illinois also a pretty good team in the conference. Southern Illinois, though, they're coming off a game where they only beat Valpo by 9. That doesn't look very good. So they might have been looking ahead to this game a little bit. So I think they're probably going to be ready for this one against Drake. So I do look to Southern Illinois in that one. Not one of my plays, at least not at the moment, but that's another way that I look. My plays are all I think they're all in the bigger conferences, actually, and they're all the biggest letdown spots imaginable. So that's kind of the theme for today. And then there was one other game. Well, Sacramento State, I think they're in a letdown spot. They just beat Weber State, who was kind of at the top of that conference. So that's they're in a letdown spot, I think, down from -2.5 to -2 against Idaho State. So I would lean to Idaho State in that one. Not a good spot for Sacramento State, really. Idaho State just beat Portland State, but it is going to be their second straight road game now, so I don't know about that. And Sacramento State, I don't know, kind of at the bottom of the conference there, but that kind of makes their win against Weber State a bit better because that's a win that you don't expect. That's like a hard-fought win there. And then I know I mentioned UT Rio Grande Valley in their previous game, and they won again they won in an upset in another huge game. They'd come close to upsetting Stephen F. Austin and Abilene Christian, came really close to pulling off upsets in those games, and then did pull off the upset against Seattle. So, I mean, I know I said it in the Seattle game, but how much is Rio Grande Valley going to have left in the tank after 3 straight huge effort games like that, man, as big underdogs in all 3 of them? And now they're coming back home. Well, no, they're already home for the previous game, but they're at home now. Utah Valley is a 4.5 point road favorite in that one. I don't know if I want to necessarily lay 4.5 on the road. Utah Valley is coming off losing to UT Arlington. Ken Palm, I don't know what he's got this number at, but I don't know. I would kind of lean to Utah Valley a little bit. He's got it at 4. So there is that. And then I like Air Force against San Jose State as well. San Jose State coming off playing a really tough game against San Diego State where they could have won that game. They lost right at the end. That's a difficult way to lose, man. And they're coming off a pretty decent performance against Boise the night before that, who has been looking pretty good as well. Tough loss for San Jose State against San Diego State, having to go to Air Force now. Not going to be an easy place to go, and having to go into Elevation, I believe, for that, because that's in Colorado. But Air Force is coming off a fairly tough game where they lost by 13 at Nevada, and they have Colorado State up next, which is a big game for them because that's like an in-state rival there and an in-state bigger brother to them. So I don't know if are they going to be fully focused on San Jose State? Maybe. Both of these teams still need their first conference win. So San Jose State, I think, is in the worst spot in that one between the two. And Ken Palm's got Air Force winning this game by 1. So he does have San Jose State as the better team, although the line is telling you that. So those are the way I look at them. And Santa Clara, we saw their crowd rush the court, man, because they just beat Gonzaga, even though it's kind of a down year for Gonzaga. Gonzaga was still ranked, and I still think they're actually like probably the best team in the WCC, even though I think it's a little bit close between them, St. Mary's, and San Francisco. And then Santa Clara is probably the next team in line in that conference after that. Santa Clara, that's a huge win for Santa Clara. The only problem is they're facing St. Mary's in this game. So this is another big game for them. And I don't think they're going to overlook St. Mary's. So if it was like any other team in this conference besides St. Mary's or San Francisco, I'd probably be against Santa Clara here, but I just can't do it, man. Even though they stormed the court, that was a huge win over Gonzaga. I think they won on like an and one on a foul right at the end there on a reffing call, which I don't know if it was the wrong call or anything like that, but it was still, that's kind of a crazy way to win that game. That was a huge win. Everybody stormed the court. So are they still going to be in a letdown spot with a team as good as St. Mary's coming in there? I don't know. KenPom only has this game at 3, and St. Mary's is they're up from 3.5 to 5.5. So I think people are playing the letdown spot against Santa Clara. I don't really want to lay points on the road, so staying off of that one as well. The games that I'm actually on, let's go through them, man. 4 games I'm on. Seton Hall plus 4.5 is number 1 against Butler. This is going to be a huge letdown spot. I'm going with the letdown spots, even if it does involve playing some teams that are like decent. I'm still doing it, man. Seton Hall, they're in one of the biggest letdown spots of the day. This is one of the first ones up on the schedule, and I saw it, and I'm like, yep. So Butler is in one of the biggest letdown spots. Excuse me. Seton Hall, they pulled off a couple of big wins in a row at Providence, which I'm assuming was an upset, winning by 4, and then coming back home and upsetting 7th-ranked Marquette. And then I was against Seton Hall in their game after that against Georgetown. And Seton Hall somehow escaped against Georgetown. But it was obviously a letdown spot for them. So Seton Hall didn't look good in that game against Georgetown, didn't cover. I won on Georgetown. Georgetown had chances to win that game outright. So now I think Seton Hall is going to be in a spot where they're going to refocus, even though they're in a second straight road game. They were in a bad spot in their previous game, in a letdown spot, coming off the win over Marquette. Now they get to go to Butler. Butler's been playing pretty well this season in general, even though they're 2-3 in conference now. They're 11-5 overall, which is the same as what Seton Hall is, even though Seton Hall is ahead of them in the conference. I don't think Seton Hall is going to necessarily overlook Butler, even though they do have St. John's up next, which is a pretty big game as well, and so is Creighton after that. But I think that Georgetown game is going to scare them into focus here. I think they will be focused just because they almost lost to Georgetown, and that was a bad spot for Seton Hall in that one, coming off the win against Marquette. But who's the team that's coming off the win against Marquette now? Oh, yeah, Butler is that team. Butler just went into Marquette and beat them at home. So I think people are going to look at this and maybe want to be on the Butler side here, even though Seton Hall is ahead of them in the conference. Butler, I mean, the line is telling you Butler's a slightly better team because they're 4.5 at home. But Butler, they're coming off a game where they just beat Marquette on the road. And people might look at that and say, wait a minute, Butler beat Marquette on the road. Seton Hall, I believe, just beat them at home. So that win on the road by even more points actually looks better than Seton Hall's win does. I think it was by more points. So people are going to look at that and think that, well, we want to play Butler here because they looked better against Marquette, even though both teams did beat Marquette. Butler also played UConn the game before that and played them to within 7. So another pretty tough game. I think that was a tough game. I don't know if it was one of those things where they kind of backdoored. No, that was a close game. They were within 1 point with like a few minutes left in that game. That was a close game. Butler was winning throughout the first half in that game. So back-to-back, really big performances, big efforts for Butler against UConn and Marquette. They're in a letdown spot here now, man, against Seton Hall, even though Seton Hall is ahead of them in the conference, has a good conference record. Butler does have Xavier next. That tends to be like a battle, even though Xavier's doesn't have a good record this year. Those two teams tend to battle, but I just think this is a letdown spot for Butler, man. Laying points, coming off that huge win against Marquette, that's tough. And Seton Hall, I think, should be refocused after not playing well against Georgetown. So I like that, even though Seton Hall did go into Providence and beat them, and they also beat UConn. And people might see that and say, well, Butler lost to UConn by a little bit. And I think they went into Providence and also lost. So I don't know if the syllogism thing's going to come into it, but the most recent syllogism is that Butler beat Marquette on the road by more than what Seton Hall beat them by at home. So I don't know. People might just all throw that out the window a little bit there. I'm on Seton Hall, though. Just going to – every one of these can just be simplified to the letdown spot. Seton Hall plus 4.5. That's number 1. Play number 2, even though I – don't love this one. Well, actually, hold on a minute. Let me just tell you what the KenPom number is on the Seton Hall game real quick here. He's got Butler as a slightly better team, of course, and he has the line at 4, so that's right in line with it. I'm on BYU for play number 2. They're up from 4 to 5. I laid 4.5. I think you can still find 4.5s out there. I like BYU here, even though I don't like laying points on the road. And typically, I think a team is going to be focused on a team like BYU. And BYU, they did have kind of a tough game against Baylor in their last game, but they did lose again. They've lost 2 games in a row. So I don't know that that BYU is necessarily going to be unfocused here, even though that was a tough battle against Baylor to some extent. They wound up losing in the end after I thought BYU was in a better spot in that one because the game before that was an embarrassing loss against Cincinnati at home. BYU played Baylor tough, man. They were winning the game on the road for much of the first half and into the second half, and then wound up losing in a close game. It was close, but Baylor kind of started pulling away near the end there. BYU shot a lot better in that game than they did in their previous game. They kind of lost the game on turnovers, man. So I think BYU is a little bit underrated, to be honest, because of those couple of recent losses. Even though that was a pretty tough game, against Baylor. I think because they've lost 2 in a row, I think they can't afford to really be unfocused against anybody. And they're at UCF, and UCF's got a 10-4 record. And what did UCF just do? Oh, yeah, they just beat Kansas. And they do have Texas and then Houston up next. I don't know if they're going to pay more attention to those teams than to BYU, because BYU started off 0-2 in conference, and they're behind UCF in the standings. I don't know. And Texas kind of has that bigger name. BYU and UCF are both newcomers to the Big 12 this year, but UCF, that's like the legitimizer game, man. You're new to the Big 12. You're playing against Kansas, and Kansas was beating them by double digits like throughout the first half. Kansas had a big lead, and UCF came all the way back in the second half, took the lead, and wound up hanging on and winning the game, despite Kansas shooting 51.1% from the field, too. Huge win for UCF. They stormed the court. They're new to the Big 12, and they just beat one of the elites of the Big 12 in Kansas. This is a bad spot for UCF, man. Again, it's simplified to how bad the spot is for UCF. That's a letdown spot. That's a legitimizer. The crowd massively stormed the court after that win. Kansas was ranked 3 in the country, even though I think Kansas is a bit overrated at 3. I think they're probably somewhere around 15 is actually more legitimate. So I think they're pretty overrated here. And people were talking about, well, Kansas is a title contender this year. Yeah, I don't think so. They're good, but not that good. Still, massive win for UCF. Monster win. They're only 6.5-point underdogs, but you beat Kansas, man, and you're new to the Big 12. You have arrived. That is your legitimizer game. So now I think they're going to be in a letdown spot coming off of that. BYU's got to do something. They want to salvage the second game of this road trip, even though they fought pretty hard against Baylor. Kind of a tough way to lose there. They do have Iowa State up next, which is another tough game, but it's deceptively tough. So I don't know if they're going to have an eye looking ahead to that. BYU's lost 2 games in a row now, but BYU, Ken Pom has them as a 12th ranked team, and he did have them in the top 7, I think, before these first couple of losses here. I think he had them as high as 4, which is really insane. After they were reeling off those wins, although BYU didn't beat anybody, they don't have any impressive wins yet. So that scares me a little bit that they have one against San Diego State. So that was a good win against San Diego State. Their blowout win over Arizona State might look a little bit better now because Arizona State has been hot, even though I think they're so overrated. And then they have a win against NC State, which is an okay win. Other than that, no really big recent wins. But then again, I think BYU is going to want some big win here. But Ken Pom has a huge ranking discrepancy here with BYU ranked 12th and UCF ranked 77th. And BYU winning this game by 6. I'm laying the 4.5 with BYU. Central Florida, UCF, too big of a letdown spot for my liking here. So I'm on that one. And then the other letdown spots, we have 2 more. Let's do it. Oklahoma State plus 12.5. I think this line has actually gone down, even though pregame here makes it look like it's actually gone up. But I actually think it was in the 13 range or something, or 13.5. I think it's at 12.5 now pretty much everywhere. Against Iowa State, pregame makes it look like they're up from 12 to 12 with juice, or 12.5. I think that it was 13 at some spots at one point. Ken Pom does have this at 14, but when you get into point ranges that are that big, the points are kind of worth less once you get into the double-digit ranges. Each individual point is worth a little bit less. Iowa State, they're laying a huge amount of points here, man, and they are good. I've been saying Iowa State's very underrated here, and like I said, Ken Pom does have them winning this game by 14, but Iowa State, they're coming off back-to-back really big step-up games. They played tough against Oklahoma on the road, fell short, could have won that game potentially, fell short by 8, and then they upset Houston. That was their last game. Huge win against Houston. That was the first loss that Houston has taken this year. That was like Iowa State welcoming them to the Big 12. That's a huge win. That's a grinding type of game there, like low scoring. Both teams have really good defenses, like elite defenses almost on both of those teams' parts, especially Houston. That was a huge win for Iowa State and a tough, whenever you battle Houston like that and you have two defensive teams like that, that's a physical game, man. And that's what they're coming off of. And they have a ranked BYU team up next. They got Oklahoma State in the middle, who I think Oklahoma State, they're still a little bit overrated almost. I don't think they're that good. I think they're just kind of riding that like Big 12 name recognition. They're really not good this year, but I think this is a game where they're going to want to kind of show up for this one, and it is such a big letdown spot for Iowa State. They might just look past Oklahoma State. They got BYU up next, and Iowa State, they're a defensive team, man. They don't score that much. I mean, they put up some big point totals against some of the lower conference teams, but I would kind of ignore those games. Like those teams are not Big 12 teams. Those games are less they're less of an indicator than like what the Big 12 slate has looked like so far. Oklahoma State, they have not won a game in the Big 12 yet. They're 0-2. They played tough against Baylor, though, and then after that, they kind of got blown out by Texas Tech on the road. Texas Tech, not a bad team. And Oklahoma State was coming off an overtime loss to Baylor, so Oklahoma State was in a bad spot. They played Baylor really tough. And then they had a worse game against Texas Tech. I think they're going to be focused here. Excuse me. Still looking for their first Big 12 win, even though they do have Kansas next. 0-2 in conference. They're still going to want to show up for this, get their first win in the conference. And I do think it is a bounce back spot. They were in a bad hangover spot when they played Texas Tech. They're going to want to salvage the second game of this road trip, I think, even though it is the second game on the road. Do what they can, even though they are huge underdogs. Iowa State, a team with a really good defense like that and a little bit of a suspect ability to score, I would say, is a team that you don't want to be laying a double-digit point total with. So that's the thing. And Iowa State, of course, is off a monster win, like their biggest win of the season against Houston, man. Like people saying Houston, like they're now in the Big 12 and they're still like one of the elite teams in basketball. That's the legitimizer game for Iowa State there. That was a huge win for them. So I don't think they're in a good spot here at all. I'm on Oklahoma State. I don't see any of the market percentages yet or anything like that in these plus 12.5. And then the final one is Alabama plus 2.5. I don't even know if this line is still out there. The line, I saw the line anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 last night. You might still be able to get 2. I still like it at plus 1.5. Getting plus points on Alabama as an underdog because I think Alabama's the better team. The line is telling you they're the better team here, but their record does not look good this year so far. And people are kind of ignoring Alabama, even though Alabama was so good last year. They were overrated a bit last year, but they were still one of the top several teams in college basketball this year. And this year, I think KenPom has them ranked 8th right now in the country. They've had one of the toughest schedules in the country this year. So Alabama, and KenPom has them winning this game by 2, even though he does have Mississippi State ranked really well as well at 25th. Still, Alabama, I think, is really being undervalued here at this point. People are kind of just forgetting. They think last year was a fluke, whatever. They got knocked out. They were they underperformed in the tournament, let's say. That it didn't look good for them in the tournament. So people are just not really paying attention to Alabama. They've had a lot of tough games this year, man. Their schedule has been brutal. I mean, even in the out of conference, they played Moorhead and blew them out. They blew out Indiana State. Those are two teams that are good in their good in their own conferences, like atop their own smaller conferences. Alabama lost to Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State's pretty good. They beat Oregon, who's looking pretty good. They lost to Clemson, who's been ranked for a while now. They lost to Purdue by 6, Creighton on the road by 3, Arizona by double digits. But even so, they absolutely annihilated Liberty. So people are going to look at this, though, and say, but wait a minute. They don't have any really strong wins either. So people are just going to kind of overlook Alabama, man. Mississippi State has the better overall record, even though they're 1-1 in the conference. Alabama's just kind of sneaky. Alabama just blew out South Carolina. South Carolina's good. But I don't know if people are really going to be looking at that because South Carolina is just kind of under the radar right now. Don't really have any huge wins yet. I don't think so. People, I don't think, are paying much attention to South Carolina. They're kind of like a tournament bubble team at the moment. I think they might get in to the tournament. Alabama is actually the better team, though, than Mississippi State here. Mississippi State, this is a gigantic letdown spot for them, man. Even though people might say, well, wait a minute, Mississippi State lost to South Carolina the game before that, and Alabama blew them out. Yeah, that is true. So people might do that syllogism thing, but I don't even really care. Mississippi State just beat Tennessee, who was the 5th-ranked team in the country, one of the contenders in the SEC. Huge win for Mississippi State. Biggest win of the season. Biggest game of the season. Now they're in a letdown spot. That was a massive win. They get to stay home after that huge win over Tennessee. And that was a game like with the Iowa State-Houston game. Mississippi State and Iowa State were both way ahead in those games. And the team that they were up against wouldn't go away and came all the way back and really made a game of it and made it tough on them. So full effort for sure in both of those games for Iowa State and Mississippi State. This is a letdown spot for Mississippi State, facing an unranked Alabama team who actually is way better than what their unranked status looks like. And Mississippi State has Kentucky up next, who's ranked 6th in the country. So facing 2 top 10 teams, and then this team, who I think is actually a top 10 team. I think all 3 of those teams actually might. Maybe Kentucky isn't. Maybe Kentucky's a little bit outside the top 10. The rankings are all just a mess. Like, the rankings obviously don't make any sense. Don't trust the AP polls. Trust the odds makers and the power ratings, guys. Alabama is a legit team still, top 10 team. A lot of their losses are excusable to really good teams. They face a tough schedule so far. I think Alabama's going to show up here, and you're getting points with Alabama. With Mississippi State in this rough spot after like legitimizing themselves with that huge win over Tennessee. I like Alabama here, even though Alabama is coming off a blowout win over South Carolina. It also means that wasn't like they didn't have to expend that much energy to do that. The game was over. The game was in hand well before it was over. So I like Alabama in that one. And then quickly, man, there's so many games here, and I got to get out of here soon. Going to the NBA quickly. Really don't like this NBA card. There's not even really much to comment on, even though I think the Bucks are in a letdown spot because they just beat the Celtics and they destroyed the Celtics. Everybody was talking about how embarrassing that loss was for the Celtics. They were losing by like 38 at halftime or something, or 37, whatever it was, which is their biggest halftime deficit since the 60s. Still wound up losing by, I think, in the 30s. So that's going to mean that the Celtics are probably in an embarrassed mood, but the Celtics are laying up to 15.5 now from 12.5 against the Rockets, up to 15.5, 88% of the cash on them, 71% of the tickets. I do think the Celtics are not a team you want to play against, but I'm not laying a huge point total like that with the Celtics. But they're going to be in an angry mood, I think, off of that embarrassing loss, even though it is to one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference in the Bucks. The Bucks might be feeling pretty high and mighty on themselves after that win, but they're up from 9 to 11.5 here. 74% of the cash and 63% of the tickets on them. So it looks like the market is moving on the Bucks here too. And are they going to be totally focused on a Warrior team though that's below 500 this year? Even though the Warriors, they're a named team still, but the Bucks just totally crushed the Celtics, and that's what they're coming off of. Bucks have to be in a little bit of a letdown spot there, man. So I would look only to the Warriors side in that one, even though I'm not going to do it. The game I'm on is already moving a little bit on the LA Lakers. I got this game at Lakers 1.5. It was pick 'em at one point. Lakers at the Jazz. Lakers looked like they opened 2.5, and then I think it dropped all the way down to pick 'em, and now it's back up to 1.5 with juice. 56% of the cash on the Lakers, 50% of the tickets, split evenly. I like the Lakers here, man. Something has to give against the Utah Jazz here. I think this is going to be the spot where Utah finally slips up and doesn't perform well, even though it is LeBron and the Lakers. The Lakers have not been playing well, and I think Utah actually has the better record of these two teams now by like one game or a half game or something. Utah's been playing way too well recently. They've won 4 in a row. They've won 7 of their last 8, and they've won, 10 of their last 12 games or something like that. beating a bunch of good teams in a row. The last loss is a blowout loss at Boston to start their road trip they had there. And then they went into Philadelphia and beat Philadelphia, even though I think Philadelphia had some injuries. Then they went into Milwaukee after that, and they crushed Milwaukee or beat them by 16 points. They came home, and returning home is not usually a good spot for a team, especially off a big win over Milwaukee like that. And they beat Denver by double digits as well. Huge win over Denver. So then you'd think Utah probably should have been in a letdown spot off of that. But no, they're facing Toronto, who's bad. But Toronto was coming off kind of a tough battle against the Clippers, who were a good team in the game before that, which is why I didn't really want to get involved in this game. And Utah blew them out more than they blew any of these other teams out. They beat them by 32 points. But Toronto's not a good team. But Utah, something has to give, man. Like, they have to have some spot where they finally just run out of gas, and I think this has to be it. Even though the Lakers, they're the name team, they have LeBron, they just have been struggling. They haven't been playing well, and Utah is on a back-to-back, even though they're staying at home, coming off that huge win, and then last night putting up 145 points. I mean, come on, man. Something's got to give, and people are going to look at this and think, well, Utah's coming off a blowout win, and we just saw LA, the Lakers play on national TV, on TNT, basically, and get blown out by Phoenix. An embarrassing loss for LA. So what gives? And the line's just like pick the winner, basically. People are going to be like, what is going on with this line here? It looks too easy almost to take Utah at this point with the way these teams have been playing, which is crazy to say, but I think that's the case. I think they're going to have to slip up at some point. I think this might be it on a back-to-back, a third game in 4 nights. It is a fourth game in 6, and it is a fifth game in 8, and it is a sixth in 9, and a seventh in 11. Something's got to give here, man. They've had a jammed schedule. LA at least has one day off, and like I said, they fell to below 500 again and had a really bad loss against Phoenix there, an ugly loss. But that was the game where they were coming off beating they were coming off beating Toronto, I guess, which was a game that I guess didn't look that great, that win over Toronto, but they had beaten the Clippers the day before that, and I think Phoenix had gotten embarrassed by the Clippers, so Phoenix wanted to turn it on after that, and it was kind of one of those syllogism things where Phoenix looked way worse against the Clippers than the Lakers did, so Phoenix was able to turn it on and really stick it to the Lakers, and now the Lakers are coming off that with one day off, and they get to go out on the road after that too, which I think will help them get away from home, like put aside those distractions, put that bad loss behind you, go on the road. I think they might be focused with the way Utah's been playing recently, so I like it. I'm on the Lakers -1.5, so basically just to win the game. And then real quick, going over to the NHL, I got 2 plays. These are also letdown spots, I believe. First one in the NHL, I don't even know when these are. These are both tonight. One's later than the other. New York Islanders at -104 is the first one that I'm on. Where are we at here? The Islanders are up from -105 to -108, but it looks like they're kind of public. 82% of the tickets, 90% of the cash. The line is moving on them, though, man, and they're the road favorite for a reason. The books are telling you they're the better team over Nashville, although maybe the spots factored in a little bit. Nashville played last night, so they have no time off, and they were in Dallas, and they've come back home off of that. Not really huge travel, but they just beat Dallas again. They've beaten Dallas twice on the road in the last 3 games. Huge wins over Dallas, man. Those are big games for them, and they have Vegas up next. So they might be paying more attention to these Western Conference teams than an Islanders team that's coming into their house here. So I don't like the spot for Nashville. And sandwiched between those Dallas games, they didn't do well against Anaheim off of that other win over Dallas. So that was a letdown spot and a sandwich spot. I think this is a letdown spot and a sandwich spot as well. Off of another win at Dallas and having another big road game up next against Vegas, the Islanders, their record, if you factor in their overtime losses, their record doesn't look that good, really. It's below 500. They're coming off an overtime win, which is a tough game. They beat Toronto. It's a nice win for the Islanders. But the one thing about that is that I don't think they're going to totally be in a letdown spot here. I think that might be a momentum starter because they had lost 2 games, but to good teams, Vegas and Vancouver before that. Their recent losses have been mostly to good teams, at least. They faced a pretty tough schedule recently. That Toronto win, I think, might help them start some momentum here. Now they get to take that momentum out on the road. So I actually kind of like that aspect of it. When you've lost some games, you lost that game in the return home, you won the second game when you were home, and now you get to go back out on the road, carrying that momentum with one day off, going to Nashville. I think they're going to be focused. Nashville does have a winning record, I believe. So I think the Islanders are the better team, are in the better spot to be focused here, and they're the better team. So I laid it minus 104. And then the final game I'm on is the Calgary Flames, which I should have been on them in their last game because they were up against, I don't know, some team that was in a letdown. So they're against Arizona, who was coming off a win over the Bruins. So Arizona was in a letdown spot. We're going back to the well here, and we're going to take Calgary again, even though they won that game in that spot and won it 6-2, and they've put up 6 goals in each of their last 2 games. I still think this is a much, much worse spot for Vegas. And Calgary has Arizona up again next, and they just beat Arizona. So you're going to be focused on Vegas, man. It's the returning champs. The one they faced Vegas twice, actually, and they beat Vegas at home in overtime. And then the most recent time they went into Vegas and lost to Vegas in overtime. So a couple of tough battles. So does that mean that Vegas will take them seriously because this team took them into overtime twice? Maybe. But what's Vegas off of? Oh, they're off of what Arizona was just off of, an overtime or a big close win over the Bruins. In this case, it was overtime. I think the Arizona one was not an overtime win, but Vegas has played some tough games, man. Recently, they played Colorado before that, in Florida 2 games before that, even though they lost both those games by 3 goals. The Bruins game was a back-to-back, and they still won in overtime off the game against Colorado. They didn't do well and lost 3-0. And now they get Calgary, who's kind of the down spot in the schedule here, man. Out of Colorado, Boston, even the Islanders there, in Florida, and then with Nashville, and then the Rangers and Pittsburgh and the Devils up next. Calgary's got the worst record out of all those teams, I believe. So I think this might be the spot where Vegas isn't totally focused, even though Calgary has played them fairly tough both times this year. Vegas is coming off an overtime win over Boston, man, and they're dealing with some injury concerns here and haven't been really playing as well recently, but they still carry a lot of that like weight, that name recognition. They're still the returning champs. They're in a letdown spot, I think, and Calgary, even though they're coming off a win over the Coyotes, I don't think it's like a huge win or anything like that, even though it looks good that they won 6-2. But maybe they're just going to carry their momentum into this game. They're going to be focused on a team like the Knights, especially when the Knights beat them in the last game, and they're the returning champs. So Vegas is down from minus 151 to minus 134. I don't really see the market percentages yet, but that's going to do it for me, man. So those Calgary plus 124 is that play. So got them as the nice money line dog and a good spot to do it. Those plays one more time are college basketball. Seton Hall plus 4.5, BYU minus 4.5, Oklahoma State plus 12.5, and Alabama plus 2.5. In hockey, New York Islanders minus 104, Calgary Flames plus 124. In the NBA, LA Lakers minus 1.5, and in the NFL, Kansas City Chiefs tonight minus 3.5. But that line has kind of gone away from you. So that's a lot of games. What is it? I think that's 8 games. Let's have a winning day, man. Let's get back on the winning track here after a bunch of losing days in a row, 3 in a row. I think let's do it, man. Have a good day. Have a great start to the NFL playoffs. Peace. And a good college basketball Saturday as well. Peace out.